In the winter of 1978, deep inside the administrative archives of the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Trade, a high-value intelligence source suddenly vanished. His name was Viktor Sokolov, a senior logistics analyst responsible for monitoring shipments of industrial equipment between Eastern Europe and several neutral countries. To most people, Viktor looked like another quiet bureaucrat, a man whose life was defined by paperwork, dusty ledgers, and predictable routines. But to the KGB, he was something much more important. A critical asset, a classified internal term for someone whose disappearance could trigger a major security crisis. Viktor had access to information the West would pay millions for. Machinery transfer routes, covert procurement channels, and identities of Soviet-linked companies operating abroad. The KGB had monitored him for years, convinced he was loyal. And then, on a snowy Thursday morning, he simply didn't arrive at work. At first, no one panicked. Missing a day wasn't unusual in the USSR. Broken trams, illnesses, and family emergencies were common. But when two KGB supervisors visited Viktor's apartment that same evening, everything changed. His door was unlocked. His winter coat was still hanging on the wall. His briefcase lay on the table with documents he normally took to the office every day. His passport was missing, but his domestic ID booklet was still in place. And on the floor, half hidden under a chair, officers found something far more disturbing: a torn page from an American magazine. The page was a fragment of a 1977 issue of Time. Soviet citizens were not supposed to possess Western magazines. The torn piece showed only a corner of a page, an advertisement featuring a U.S. company specializing in communications equipment for the KGB. This was a red flag. Communications equipment was exactly the type of technology the USSR was desperately trying to obtain through covert channels. The discovery raised a terrifying possibility. Viktor might have been in contact with American intelligence. Within an hour, the KGB launched Operation Sneg 2, a rapid response protocol used only when the disappearance of a key figure was believed to threaten national security. Agents interrogated neighbors, co-workers, and anyone who had interacted with Viktor. They found out something unexpected. Viktor had been seen on the previous evening, talking to a foreigner near the Arbat district, a place frequented by diplomats and undercover agents. The witness couldn't identify the man, but described him as tall, wearing a dark Western-style coat. That description alone caused panic. Western-style coats were rare in Moscow. Only diplomats, black market traders, or intelligence officers wore them. The KGB's internal report concluded that the unknown man was likely affiliated with the Embassy of the United States. By the next morning, the KGB had set up checkpoints across the city. They inspected outgoing trains, monitored airports, and quietly blocked roads leading to the Finnish border, a common escape route for defectors. But Viktor was nowhere. Inside the Lubyanka headquarters, fears escalated. If Viktor had defected, he could expose years of secret Soviet procurement operations. If he had been kidnapped by American intelligence, the situation was even worse. And if someone inside the USSR had helped him vanish, that meant a breach deep inside the state's own security structure. No matter the explanation, one thing was certain: the USSR had lost a critical asset. And in moments like this, there was only one enemy the KGB was trained to blame: the United States. But as the investigation unfolded, the truth became far more complicated than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of Viktor Sokolov's disappearance, the KGB's Directorate K, the division focused on counterintelligence against the United States, had taken full control of the investigation. Their assumption was simple: no Soviet citizen with access to sensitive trade data would vanish without the involvement of a foreign service. And when it came to theft of industrial secrets, the KGB saw only one true adversary: the CIA. A secret meeting was called in a windowless briefing room inside Lubyanka. Maps of Moscow covered the walls, with colored pins marking locations Viktor was known to frequent. Surveillance logs, phone intercept summaries, and intercepted foreign radio transmissions were stacked across the table. Every officer in the room understood the stakes. If Viktor had been taken, it meant the Americans had successfully penetrated a Soviet ministry. If he had defected, it meant the Americans had recruited him under the KGB's nose. The discussion began with the only physical clue: the torn page from the American magazine. The communications equipment company advertised on the fragment had, according to Soviet trade analysts, supplied technology to several shell corporations suspected of assisting U.S. intelligence. Nothing on the page proved a direct CIA link. But the timing was alarming. Only a month before, the KGB had intercepted a coded radio transmission from an unidentified station believed to be connected to American operations in Europe. The message referred to an asset within a logistics bureau, though no one knew which country it referred to. Suddenly, that fragment of a magazine felt like a quiet confirmation. An analyst named Orlov presented another piece of evidence. 2 days before Viktor vanished, the KGB recorded a shortwave transmission coming from the U.S. Embassy compound in Moscow. The message included an unusual sequence of numbers. It matched the structure of a one-time pad communication, the type used for covert instructions to field assets. None of this proved Viktor was the intended recipient, but the pattern was unsettlingly close to previous CIA procedures documented in old case files. The officers debated theories. Was Viktor grabbed off the street? Did he voluntarily approach an American diplomat? Or was the U.S. Embassy providing protection while preparing to smuggle him out of the country? What concerned them most was the eyewitness testimony, the man in the western coat. Several teams were sent to examine embassy personnel records, and KGB watchers stationed near the American compound were ordered to increase surveillance. At the same time, a parallel investigation quietly began. KGB operatives studied Viktor's psychological profile. For years he had appeared loyal and stable, but 3 months before his disappearance, he had filed a request to travel to Czechoslovakia for a cultural program. The request had been denied. The KGB now wondered whether that denial had pushed him toward the Americans, or whether the trip had been part of a larger plan. Perhaps he was already compromised. While the KGB searched for answers, the CIA station inside the U.S. Embassy was experiencing its own unease. Although they had not yet been directly accused, the sudden tightening of Soviet checkpoints, the increased surveillance around embassy vehicles, and the unusual presence of plainclothed officers near the diplomatic quarters made it clear something significant had happened. The CIA began reviewing its own operations to ensure no American personnel had been compromised or mistakenly suspected. Inside a secure communications room, an encrypted cable was sent to Langley. Soviets appeared to be reacting to internal breach. Unknown. Connection to U.S. operations. Monitoring situation. The CIA did not mention Viktor's name because, officially, they had no record of him. But unofficially, analysts wondered whether the KGB had simply lost another bureaucrat and needed a foreign scapegoat. Or worse, perhaps someone within the Soviet system had vanished with information valuable to both sides. By the end of the second day, the KGB had concluded one thing with absolute certainty. Viktor's disappearance was not a coincidence. The pattern resembled earlier CIA extractions in Eastern Europe. Fast, quiet, leaving little physical trace. And so, the working theory became official. Viktor Sokolov had not simply walked away. He had been taken. But if the CIA had gone to such lengths, the KGB wondered, what exactly had Viktor been carrying? The answer lay hidden in a set of classified ledgers that only a few Soviet officials ever saw, documents that revealed a secret network of procurement, fronts and technology channels. If Viktor had shared even a fraction of that information with the United States, it could cripple Soviet operations abroad. And so the KGB doubled down. They shifted from search mode to retaliation planning. Officers began preparing operations meant to pressure American diplomats, disrupt suspected safe houses, and expose any U.S. contacts operating inside Moscow. The Americans were becoming nervous. The Soviets were becoming aggressive. And Viktor Sokolov, the man at the center of the storm, was still nowhere to be found. The file contained a failed recruitment attempt from 5 years earlier, targeting a Soviet logistics analyst believed to be quietly resentful of his restricted career. The analyst had refused cooperation but had displayed signs of curiosity. His name was never confirmed, but the profile, age, position, department matched Viktor almost perfectly. If Viktor had reappeared suddenly after 5 years of silence, it meant one of two things. He had finally decided to cooperate, or someone had decided to use his old profile to create a diversion. Meanwhile, in Lubyanka, the KGB uncovered something even more disturbing. A classified report from a Soviet trade mission in Finland mentioned a recent American inquiry into Eastern European procurement channels, an area the CIA hadn't focused on for years. The timing suggested that the Americans were preparing for a major intelligence breakthrough. Combined with the microphone found in the archive, the torn American magazine page, and Viktor's access to the Gamma ledger, the picture became grim. By the end of the third day, the KGB reached a devastating conclusion. The Americans had learned about the Gamma network. Perhaps not everything, but enough to begin dismantling it. And Viktor, whether willingly or unknowingly, was at the heart of it. But there was still one missing piece. If the CIA had taken Viktor, where was he? The U.S. Embassy had not increased its vehicle activity. No diplomatic cars were seen leaving Moscow, and no border stations reported suspicious crossings. There were no signs of extraction. It was as if Viktor had vanished into thin air. But the KGB analyst studying his last known movements noticed something everyone else missed, a detail that shifted the entire investigation. Viktor never left Moscow. He had simply moved somewhere the KGB hadn't looked yet. The file contained a failed recruitment attempt from 5 years earlier, targeting a Soviet logistics analyst believed to be quietly resentful of his restricted career. The analyst had refused cooperation but had displayed signs of curiosity. His name was never confirmed, but the profile, age, position, department matched Viktor almost perfectly. If Viktor had reappeared suddenly after 5 years of silence, it meant one of two things. He had finally decided to cooperate, or someone had decided to use his old profile to create a diversion. Meanwhile, in Lubyanka, the KGB uncovered something even more disturbing. A classified report from a Soviet trade mission in Finland mentioned a recent American inquiry into Eastern European procurement channels, an area the CIA hadn't focused on for years. The timing suggested that the Americans were preparing for a major intelligence breakthrough. Combined with the microphone found in the archive, the torn American magazine page, and Viktor's access to the Gamma ledger, the picture became grim. By the end of the third day, the KGB reached a devastating conclusion. The Americans had learned about the Gamma network. Perhaps not everything, but enough to begin dismantling it. And Viktor, whether willingly or unknowingly, was at the heart of it. But there was still one missing piece. If the CIA had taken Viktor, where was he? The U.S. Embassy had not increased its vehicle activity. No diplomatic cars were seen leaving Moscow, and no border stations reported suspicious crossings. There were no signs of extraction. It was as if Viktor had vanished into thin air. But the KGB analyst studying his last known movements noticed something everyone else missed, a detail that shifted the entire investigation. Viktor never left Moscow. He had simply moved somewhere the KGB hadn't looked yet. The KGB's internal report, marked for Directorate Eyes Only, painted a picture of growing paranoia. Colonel Leonov, who had taken over the investigation after the death of Kravitz, wrote that the Americans were operating with a level of access impossible, without help from within. That single sentence became the spark that nearly ignited a diplomatic firestorm. Moscow demanded answers. Washington denied everything. And somewhere between these two superpowers, the truth hid in the shadows. Meanwhile, a new strain of intelligence began to surface. Inside the CIA, an anonymous memo appeared on the desk of Deputy Director White. It contained details about Sokol that were too accurate to come from open sources. Even the code name, something only a handful of CIA officers knew, was written correctly, in Cyrillic. At the bottom of the page was a chilling line. "You are searching for the wrong mole." White froze. If someone inside the CIA was feeding information to the Soviets, then everything about the operation was backwards. Maybe the CIA didn't recruit Sokol at all. Maybe he had volunteered, but not for the Americans. The memo traced back to a string of strange anomalies. Reports altered, messages delayed, surveillance logs missing. Someone inside Langley was manipulating the flow of information, quietly, precisely, with the patience of a chess player waiting for one perfect move. Back in Moscow, the KGB broadened their investigation. Old interrogation transcripts were reopened. Former colleagues of Sokol were questioned again. This time, the tone was different, more brutal, more desperate. The Soviets needed someone to blame. A face, a traitor. But then came the breakthrough. A surveillance photograph from Vienna surfaced in the archives, misfiled for years. In the grainy image, a man who looked exactly like Sokol was shaking hands with another figure whose identity was blurred. At first, analysts assumed it was proof of CIA contact. But when the photo was enhanced, a small detail shattered the entire narrative. The blurred figure wore a lapel pin, an emblem used only by Soviet trade delegates, not CIA officers. The KGB was stunned. If the man meeting Sokol was not American, then the entire premise of defection collapsed. Someone inside the USSR had been running a shadow operation parallel to the official KGB structure, and they had ensured that the CIA took the blame. Suddenly, the pieces began to align. Altered communication logs, forged reports implicating the US, the mysterious Vienna meeting, and the wrong mole memo delivered to Langley. The truth pointed toward something far more dangerous than espionage. A rogue network operating across both sides of the Iron Curtain, neither American nor Soviet, but something in between. a group that thrived on manipulating superpowers into suspecting one another. By late 1981, both agencies, unknowingly, were hunting the same ghost. And then, as if on cue, a new message appeared inside the CIA mailroom. No signature, no fingerprints, just a piece of faded Soviet stationery and 5 typewritten words. Sokol was never yours. Both the CIA and the KGB, now staring at the same impossible puzzle, launched parallel investigations, but every lead ended where it began, in contradictions, forged trails, and dead ends. It was as if someone had designed the entire operation to keep both superpowers chasing shadows. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In January 1982, a retired KGB archivist named Pavel Andreev reached out to his former supervisor. He claimed he had information about Sokol that had never been properly logged. At first, the KGB dismissed him, another old officer seeking attention. But when Andreev revealed a sealed box containing original surveillance reels, untouched for more than a decade, Moscow listened. What they saw was shocking. The reels showed Sokol meeting the Soviet trade delegate in Vienna again, but this time, the camera angle was different, and the man's face was fully visible. He was not a trade delegate at all. He was a decorated KGB colonel named Viktor Reznik, a man who officially died in a car crash in 1972. Yet here he was, alive, operating off books, reporting to no known structure of the KGB or the Soviet government. The KGB immediately reclassified the footage. Only 5 people saw it. 3 believed it. 2 feared it. 1 tried to destroy it. But it was too late. Across the ocean, the CIA's internal mole hunt uncovered a hidden compartment inside an old safe in the deputy director's office, a compartment no one knew existed. Inside were handwritten notes, coded messages, and a list of payments made to an unidentified operative. The CIA assumed this was evidence of Soviet infiltration, until they read the signatures. Every note was signed with the same enigmatic mark, a simple circle with a diagonal slash through it. No initials, no name, just a symbol. One CIA analyst recognized it. The same symbol appeared in a classified briefing from the 1960s, referring to an unidentified third entity rumored to operate during the Cold War, a group of agents who defected from both intelligence communities to form their own invisible network. Their purpose, to manipulate global events from the shadows, balancing power by creating chaos. This entity had a code name used only once in history, then buried, the Meridian Group. As fragments of information aligned, a chilling truth surfaced. Sokol had not been a CIA asset. He had not been a Soviet loyalist. He had been a Meridian operative, groomed inside the USSR, pretending to defect to the Americans, all while secretly reporting to a network that served neither nation. His disappearance in 1981 was not the result of betrayal. It was an extraction. He vanished because his mission was complete. When both agencies finally compared notes, indirectly, through diplomatic backchannels and subtle gestures, they realized the same thing. They had been manipulated by a ghost, organization older and more disciplined than either of them. The final twist came when the CIA cryptographers decrypted the last message ever connected to Sokol. It was short, elegant, and terrifying. Nations compete. We correct the balance. No one ever found Sokol. No one proved Meridian existed. But after 1982, unexplained failures in intelligence operations began to surface across the world. Missions collapsed without reason. Assets vanished without trace. Communications were intercepted by parties unknown. Both the KGB and CIA quietly buried the Sokol case. It was safer that way, because if the truth ever became public, that a third, unseen hand controlled the world's 2 greatest intelligence agencies, the Cold War itself would unravel. And so the official files describe Sokol as presumed dead, cause unknown, case closed. But the unofficial truth, whispered only by those who saw the evidence, is far more unsettling. He didn't defect. He didn't betray. He simply went home.